All right, ready to dive into a side of Argentina you don't often hear about.
Definitely.
Today, we're exploring the history of Afro-Argentines.
Sounds fascinating.
We usually think tango, European architecture, Italian and Spanish immigrants.
Right.
But what about the African influence?
Exactly. A hidden history waiting to be uncovered.
We're using the history, presence, and marginalization of Black people in Argentina as our guide.
Great source. It really challenges the idea of Argentina as a purely European nation.
I'm already intrigued. Okay, so first things first. The book claims Argentina had a substantial Afro-descendant population.
That's right, a significant presence that often gets overlooked.
It seems to contradict the dominant narrative.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
While Argentina wasn't as involved in the transatlantic slave trade as, say, Brazil,
Right.
it still received a large number of enslaved Africans. In the late 1700s, nearly a third of Buenos Aires was of African descent.
Wow, 30%.
It's a crucial piece of the puzzle that's often missing from the story.
It really flips our preconceived notions about Argentina's past.
Yeah.
So if their presence was that significant, what roles did they play in colonial society?
Oh, they weren't just relegated to the margins. Their labor was absolutely essential to the colonial economy.
I see.
We're talking infrastructure, farming, domestic service, even skilled trades.
So they were involved in all aspects of society.
Exactly. Argentina's economic prosperity was built in part on their forced labor.
That's a perspective we don't often hear. Makes you wonder about their lives, their experiences.
It's a history worth exploring.
Absolutely. But I have to ask, did they ever resist their enslavement?
Even in the face of brutal conditions, they found ways to fight back.
Really?
We're talking subtle acts like work slowdowns, but also escapes and full-blown rebellions.
Wow. So they weren't just passive victims.
Absolutely not. These communities were incredibly resilient, holding on to their traditions, forming religious brotherhoods called cofradias,
Cofradias.
and maintaining elements of their African heritage.
What exactly were these cofradias?
Think of them as more than religious groups. They were spaces for preserving African traditions, music, dance, spiritual practices,
I see.
all under the guise of Catholicism, a way to resist cultural erasure in a society trying to homogenize them.
That's fascinating. So a space for community and belonging.
Exactly. A way to hold on to their identity.
So eventually slavery is abolished in Argentina.
Right, but it's not a simple story.
More complicated than just a sudden shift to equality.
Exactly. In 1813, they passed the law of the free womb. It granted freedom to children born to enslaved mothers.
But not full abolition.
Not right away. That didn't
Okay.
come until the mid-19th century.
Okay.
And even then, legal freedom didn't mean social or economic equality. New forms of marginalization emerged.
So freedom didn't mean the end of their struggles.
Not at all. Their story continues.
Were there any specific events in the 19th century that particularly impacted the Afro-Argentine community, either positively or negatively?
Well, the Wars of Independence, for example.
How so?
Afro-Argentines fought for a nation that would ultimately continue to marginalize them. Many were forced into the army.
Really?
Yeah, and the casualty rates, especially during the Paraguayan War, were devastating.
That's tragic, fighting for a nation that wouldn't fully recognize their sacrifices.
It really highlights the complexities of their story.
The source also mentions epidemics and urbanization playing a role in their marginalization.
Right. Think about rapid urbanization in a city like Buenos Aires. Overcrowding, poor sanitation.
Perfect conditions for disease outbreaks.
Exactly. Epidemics like the 1871 yellow fever outbreak hit marginalized communities the hardest.
Makes sense.
And as the city modernized, wealthier residents moved to newer areas,
So,
pushing Afro-Argentines into poorer neighborhoods. This physical segregation further isolated them, made them less visible.
literally pushing them to the margins, it almost feels deliberate, like an attempt to erase their presence from the national narrative.
That's exactly what happened. Late 19th, early 20th century, Argentina was projecting a European image,
Right, attracting European immigrants.
especially from Italy and Spain. Part of a global trend of racist ideologies that equated European ancestry with progress.
Wow. So they're being written out of the story, despite being there from the very beginning.
It's a reminder of how history can be manipulated.
Absolutely. Yeah. But despite this erasure, they left behind a rich cultural legacy, right?
Oh, absolutely. That's what makes the story so compelling. Even facing oppression, Afro-Argentines never stopped creating, expressing themselves.
Music and dance were definitely central to that. And speaking of which, you can't talk about Argentina without tango. Is there a connection there? Did Afro-Argentines influence this iconic dance form?
It's often presented as purely European, but tango's roots are deeply intertwined with African rhythms and
We
dances.
don't say.
The syncopation, the sensuality, the improvisation, it all points to a strong African influence.
Interesting.
Tango is about passion, connection, expressing emotions through movement. These are themes that resonate deeply with African dance traditions.
I'm starting to hear tango with new ears. It's amazing how these hidden connections can reshape our understanding of something so familiar.
Exactly, it's about looking deeper.
Beyond tango, what other musical traditions did Afro-Argentines develop?
Candombe is a prime example. It emerged during the colonial period. Intricate drumming patterns played on three types of drums: chico, repique, and piano.
Okay.
Candombe was more than just music, though. It was a form of resistance, a way to preserve their heritage in the face of oppression.
Powerful. Is it still performed today?
It's experiencing a resurgence, especially during carnival celebrations. Processions with drumming, dancing, colorful costumes. It's a sight to behold, a testament to the enduring legacy of Afro-Argentine culture.
Sounds amazing. We've talked about music and dance, but were there other ways Afro-Argentines maintained their cultural identity? Did religion play a role?
Oh, absolutely. Religion was central. Remember the cofradías?
Yeah.
They were nominally Catholic, but often incorporated elements of African spiritual traditions. This syncretism, this blending of different belief systems, allowed them to navigate the restrictions of colonial society while holding on to their own spiritual roots.
So they found a way to adapt and persevere.
Exactly.
Makes you wonder, what would Argentina look like today if those attempts at silencing their voices had been successful?
A chilling thought. Remember how we discussed the manipulation of census data to erase their presence?
Yeah.
Institutions can distort reality and reinforce particular narratives. Imagine the impact on their identity, their sense of belonging, if those efforts had succeeded.
Absolutely.
It really highlights the insidious nature of systemic racism.
Not always overt violence, but subtly twisting the narrative, making an entire group invisible. Did this silencing extend to other areas of Argentine society, like media, popular culture?
Absolutely. Early 20th century literature and art often portrayed Afro-Argentines in stereotypical or dehumanizing ways, furthering the erasure of their legacy.
Erasure through misrepresentation.
In many cases, their contributions were co-opted and rebranded as European.
A classic case of cultural appropriation. It's disheartening, but sadly not surprising. But I have to believe the Afro-Argentine community never completely gave up on reclaiming their identity.
You're absolutely right. They never gave up.
Were there any signs of resistance, resurgence in the 20th century? Did they fight back against this erasure?
They absolutely did. The latter part of the 20th century saw a resurgence of Afro-Argentine activism and cultural expression. Organizations like the Afro-Argentine Civil Association and Movimiento Afrocultural emerged,
When they do.
organizing, advocating, celebrating their heritage.
So pushing back against the erasure.
Exactly. Imagine the power of these communities coming together, raising their voices, demanding to be seen and heard.
It's inspiring, a testament to their resilience.
Right.
Did they make any headway in their fight for recognition and equality?
One of the biggest victories was the reinstatement of the Afro-descendant category in the 2013 national census.
Wow.
A monumental step towards acknowledging their presence and making them visible in official statistics.
A symbolic victory, but also a tangible one, with real implications.
Absolutely. When you're not even counted, it's easy to be ignored.
It highlights the importance of data and representation in the fight for equality. But while there's been progress, the fight is far from over. Right.
Exactly. Afro-Argentines still face significant challenges. Discrimination in employment, education, underrepresentation in media and politics. It's a reminder that the work of social justice is ongoing.
Absolutely.
But it's also important to recognize and celebrate their resilience, creativity, unwavering commitment to preserving their heritage.
Their story is truly remarkable. But before we wrap up, I'm curious about the recent wave of immigration from other parts of Africa and the Caribbean. How has that influx impacted the Afro-Argentine community?
It's a great question, and it brings us to a crucial point about the evolving nature of Afro-Argentine identity in the 21st century. It's not just about reclaiming the past, it's also about embracing the present and shaping the future. This new wave of immigration adds another layer of complexity to an already rich story.
So how do these different groups relate to each other? Is there a sense of unity?
Well, it's not a monolithic experience, of course. There can be a sense of shared heritage, solidarity, a recognition of being part of a larger African diaspora. But there can also be differences in perspectives and experiences.
A complex dynamic for sure. Before we move on, though, I want to mention Chanel's Untold Chronicles. They do an incredible job unearthing hidden histories and giving a voice to the voiceless, like what we're trying to do here.
Absolutely. It's a brilliant series. I highly recommend it.
We'll be sure to include a link in the show notes. Now, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned so far before we dive into the complexities of modern Afro-Argentine identity in the final part of our deep dive. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been exploring this really fascinating but often hidden history of Afro-Argentines,
It is fascinating, isn't it?
from their vital roles in colonial times to their persistent cultural resilience.
Yeah.
And now we're going to delve into how modern immigration is shaping their community today and what lies ahead.
Right. As we were saying, this arrival of people from all these different African nations adds a really interesting layer to this whole idea of what it means to be Afro-Argentine in the 21st century.
Right.
It's not just about reclaiming the past anymore.
Yeah.
It's about how all these different experiences intersect and kind of play off of each other.
It makes you wonder if these newer immigrants face similar challenges to those who've been in Argentina for generations, or are their experiences completely different?
I think a lot of those core challenges remain the same.
Oh, okay.
Sadly, things like racism, discrimination, economic inequality are still persistent issues.
Right.
But imagine arriving in a new country where just your very presence challenges the dominant narrative of what it means to be Argentine.
Wow, yeah.
This can lead to a whole new set of hurdles, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Whether it's language barriers, cultural differences, even just navigating immigration status.
It's not just about being Afro-defendant, but
Yeah.
also navigating this complex intersection of race, nationality, social class
Right.
in a society that's still trying to figure out its own identity.
Mm.
Are there any positive aspects to this new wave of immigration?
Oh, for sure.
Okay,
I mean, for one thing, it introduces fresh perspectives and traditions,
that makes sense.
and that can really revitalize existing cultural practices.
Mm,
It can also spark new collaborations, both within Argentina and across the broader African diaspora,
I see.
potentially even leading to powerful coalitions for social change. Think of it as a cross-pollination of ideas and experiences, enriching the tapestry of Afro-Argentine culture.
A community strengthened and revitalized by its diversity.
Exactly.
Looking forward then, what do you see as the biggest challenges and opportunities for Afro-Argentines in the years to come?
Well, I think that fight for systemic change is still absolutely crucial.
Okay.
Imagine a future where Afro-Argentines have equal access to everything: housing, employment, education, where their voices are amplified in media and politics. That requires pushing for policy changes, challenging discriminatory practices at every level.
Ensuring their stories are not just told, but truly heard and valued by society.
Yes.
What about on the cultural front? What needs to happen to guarantee their rich heritage is preserved and celebrated?
I think education is key.
Okay.
Incorporating Afro-Argentine history and culture into school curricula,
Right.
that's a really powerful way to challenge the dominant narrative. Supporting research and documentation projects so these stories are preserved for future generations. Promoting cultural events and festivals so people can experience the vibrancy of these traditions firsthand.
So making sure their contributions are no longer hidden, but woven into the fabric of Argentine identity,
Exactly.
so that future generations grow up understanding the true richness and diversity of their nation's history.
Precisely. The story of Afro-Argentines is such a powerful reminder that history is often told from a very limited perspective.
Right.
It's up to us to seek out those untold stories, to listen to those voices that have been silenced for far too long.
Well, this deep dive has been incredibly eye-opening. I don't know about you, but I've learned so much. We've only just scratched the surface of this rich and complex history, but hopefully we've sparked a curiosity in our listeners to learn more. So to our listeners, we leave you with this. If you could ask an Afro-Argentine about their experiences, their hopes, their dreams, what would you want to know?
That's a good question.
Let that question guide your continued exploration of this fascinating topic.
It's definitely worth exploring.
And don't forget to subscribe and share this episode with anyone who might be interested in expanding their understanding of Latin American history and culture. Until next time, keep diving deep.